What about it? Lady Farron opened her mouth, about to say something, when a thunderous, crashing sound echoed throughout the entire municipal hall tree, creating tangible reverberations in the ground. She turned towards the source of the sound, a concerned and worried expression written all over her face. The words that were building in her mouth were quickly replaced by silence. With trepidation in her steps, Lady Farron turned towards the vine elevator and grabbed onto one with both her hands, before letting herself fall back to the ground floor. Michael, curious about the whole situation, decided to follow her down as well. Whatever crashed must have been something hefty and massive in size if it could produce those kinds of reverberations. Lady Farron landed squarely on her feet, with Michael arriving just a few moments later. They saw the reception area of the hall filled with tumultuous murmurs as the elves scurried to find the source of the crash. They crowded around the double doorways, making it hard for anyone else to get out. What happened? Lady Farron asked the receptionist. We don't know, milady, but it seemed to have come from the monuments, she replied. Lady Farron walked briskly to the door, jostling her way through the thick mob of elves crowding the exitway. It was only when the others realized her identity did they finally make way for her and Michael to go through. They both exited the municipal hall, overseeing a vista of the elven village in its entirety. Michael saw a crowd of elves on the bridges between the houses, looking down at a specific direction with grimaces and wry expressions on their faces. Down below, elven guards wearing leafy cuirasses had their bows and arrows at the ready as they rushed through to the source of the sound. They skillfully jumped, hopped, and skipped through the miniature hills brought about by the protruding roots of the gargantuan acacia trees, and reached their destination at a brisk pace. Michael followed them with his eyes, his gaze eventually landing on the center of the elven village, where a large, ornate, and ethereal garden was located. This garden was circular in nature, with flowery shrubs and foliages serving as the walls and edges of the entire collection of greenery inside. Most of the plants and flowers growing in this garden were foreign to the royal continent. They moved with alien motions and glowed unnaturally compared to the rest of the vegetation here in New Sparta. But strangely enough, even standing on the elevated root stairs of the municipal hall, he couldn't see the entirety of the garden itself. He had to get his drone to move closer for him to actually see it in its entirety. This was weird because gardens were meant to be flaunted. It was supposed to ostentatiously show the rich culture and history of a specific place. Why would they spend lavish amounts of effort and resources just to keep it away from view? This garden was closed off, like a castle guarding a royal or a monarch. It's not a garden. It's a monument, he realized. This was more evident from the fact that he saw a menagerie of stone statues peeking out from the shrub bulwark of the garden. It's not a garden. It's a monument, he realized. This was more evident from the fact that he saw a menagerie of stone statues peeking out from the shrub bulwark of the garden. He would have thought that these statues were meant to commemorate an elven hero from their history, but there were too many of them to count. There must have been more than 100 of them erected in this lavish, closed-off garden. And even though he could only see the statues up to their shoulders, he was pretty sure that they weren't even elves at all. They lacked their distinct upturned noses, their sharp eyes, and most of all, their pointy ears. These statues were of an entirely different ethnicity. Lady Farron, please come inside. She and Michael finally arrived in the monuments after following the guards. They entered through a gated arch, which was currently being guarded by multiple elven warriors. Once inside, Michael's nose was assaulted with the fragrance of flowers harmoniously emitting their natural scents and aromas. With the vibrant, lush, and blooming flora around, it would have been a perfect, heavenly experience, if not for the giant statue laying shattered on the ground, crushing a patch of vermilion flowers underneath it. So that's where that crashing sound came from. Those damned troublemakers, Lady Farron hissed. They even dare to touch our ancestors. The statue itself was scrupulously made, with details of its elven-style tunic clothes perfectly capturing reality. Too bad that its head was crushed and its body shattered into different pieces, or else it would have been one of the 7 wonders of the world. The only thing left standing on the marble pedestal was a stump where its ankles would have been. "Has anyone seen the people responsible?" Lady Farron asked. "Unfortunately not, milady. We didn't think they'd be attacking us in our own village, so we focused all our forces on the outskirts of the forest." "I take full responsibility," said one of the elven guards. Lady Farron then turned to Michael. "This is the reason why I couldn't meet with you earlier. These vandals have been terrorizing our village lately, giving me a massive headache." "Vandals?" She nodded. "It started with small pranks, like writing vulgar words on the tree barks. It was annoying, but nothing truly serious. Now, it has escalated to the point where even our ancestors are getting caught up in the tail end of these harassments. That's why I had to cut my journey short. These no-good sinners had to be stopped." The fact that even after she employed all of her forces to catch those scoundrels and still wasn't able to stop them stressed her to her wits' end. "If you see any hooded figures, tell me immediately," Farron warned Michael. "Some hooded figures did this?" Michael asked, intrigued. "Yeah. My guards saw a glimpse of them during their first spree of vandalisms. After that, our defenses couldn't find a trace of them again." Lady Farron scowled. "Who do you think they are? They definitely weren't troublesome kids who had way too much time on their hands. That's for sure. These statues were very tall. A normal human only went up to their knees. It would take a lot of strength just to push it and let it fall by itself. And despite the statues looking a bit derelict, rife with moss and vines, the stone slab it was sculpted from was a type of mineral that was almost as hard as metal itself. It would take a group of able-bodied men a few hours hacking away at the statue's knees to make it keel over. The guards would have caught them before they could have even made a dent. This vandalism was definitely done by people who had supernatural powers. "It must have been those humans," accused one of the elven guards. "They can't enter our village, so they're taking out their frustrations on our ancestors." "Stop it!" Lady Farron immediately scolded him. "There's no use throwing accusations all around. It will only sow conflict with our neighbors, and that's the exact opposite of what we want." The elven guard pursed his lips, inwardly grumbling to himself. "Do you have any enemies that would want to do this?" Michael asked. Lady Farron thought for a second before shaking her head. "We've not done anything to deserve hostility from anyone here in New Sparta." Michael looked at the stone sculpture shattered on the ground. "Maybe it has something to do with them." She bent down and picked up a fractured piece of its head. One could still see the clarity and solemn look in the man's eyes. "You said they were your ancestors, but they don't look like us?" she said, finishing his question. "Yes, that's because these people aren't elves. They're ancient humans." Michael stopped for a second, before his gaze scanned the entire garden monument in an entirely new light. When they referred to them as ancestors, they weren't just talking about their forefathers a couple of generations ago. They were talking about everyone's ancestors, human, demi-human, and beast folks alike. But why, he wondered. Were they that filial of a descendant to dedicate an entire garden monument for the ancient humans? And they built this hundreds of thousands away from their kingdom. When they arrived in the royal continent and settled in New Sparta, they actively created an entire memorial for the ancient humans. Talk about excessive. Even modern humans, who could be argued as their closest living relatives, didn't put as much effort or veneration for their memory. Certainly not enough to immortalize them into 20 feet tall statues. "We transported these sculptures all the way from the Elven Kingdom halfway across the world because they are the progenitors of our bloodline. They rode on colossal mounts and mastered the art of archery. They became the first elves. And we believe that if we keep them close to our hearts everywhere we go, we can someday inherit the power that they possess. No wonder they put so much effort into these monuments. Who wouldn't want to obtain the powers of an ancient human? Even if the chance was slim to none, it was still better than doing nothing. Maybe the vandals don't want you getting those powers," he guessed. "But these statues are just symbolic. These corporeal forms are replaceable. Destroying them is meaningless. The vandals wouldn't achieve anything significant by desecrating these statues." After hearing that, Michael was at a loss as to what the vandals' true goals were. Did they simply mean to cause disruption for the sake of it, or was there something sinister underneath all of these harmless pranks? He didn't know, but there was one thing for sure. They won't stop here. Their attacks slowly got closer and closer to the elven village, the severity slowly increasing in intensity. He wouldn't be surprised if they began to target the most important locations inside the village. Important, like where they stored their darkwood. Are they planning to steal darkwood? He asked. Lady Farron seemed to have realized this as well, but she didn't seem all that worried compared to him. She quickly turned to Michael. They can't, she said definitively. I'll show you why. They exited out of the garden monuments, wherein Lady Farron took out her bow and aimed it at one of the houses up on the wide branches of the gargantuan acacia forest. Then, she shot a stringed arrow on the overhanging edge of the house's roof. With the other end of the twine in her hand, she pulled herself upwards and began to shoot up towards the top of the tree. She offered to take him there, but he declined and flew there instead. After scaling through the heights of the elves' tree houses, he landed on the balcony, with Lady Farron already through the door. He followed behind her, finding an austere living space that fit Lady Farron's humble and laid-back personality. Going further inside, he was led down a descending spiral staircase that led into a fully enclosed room that was constructed deep in the heart of the acacia tree. This is where we store our most valuable items, Lady Farron proudly introduced. Illuminated by glowing vines, Michael saw a neatly arranged storage room filled with a motley collection of elven items, most he had never even seen before. He felt as if he walked into a museum. Walking past a few ancient, decrepit bows, he came face to face with a giant cabinet at the end of the room. And sitting inside a comfy velvet-lined cushion was an assembly of darkwood neatly cascaded into rows and columns. This place is safe, so I can ask you now. Where did you get your darkwood? What do you mean? Don't worry. Those vandals can't get anywhere near this place. This vault is enchanted with an ancient, indomitable elven spell. The entire forest would first have to be torn asunder before they could infiltrate or snoop into this place. Her assurance still gave no clarity to Michael's question. Ha! He repeated. They may be after the darkwood that you gave us. I don't know how they found out about it, but that must be the goal for their besiegement. She pointed towards the lower shelf containing only a single darkwood. That seemed to be the very piece he sold to them a few days ago. I'm not going to judge you on how you obtained this darkwood, but it may be connected to them. Did you perhaps steal it from a top-secret organization? Now, Michael was really confused. What was she talking about? It's the darkwood, she reiterated. It's different. Was there something wrong with it, or? She shook her head. No, it's perfect. In fact, it's the first of its kind in millennia. It's freshly harvested. So, they may be trying to retrieve the darkwood that you stole. He was appalled at that accusation. Stole? What, no. I farmed that myself. This time, she was the one confused. Huh. Yeah. No one's trying to retrieve it because it's mine. It took her a good second before she finally digested the truth. What? Her voice made the trinkets in the room shake. Because of her stress these last few days, Lady Farron's mind immediately went to a convoluted explanation for everything that happened. She thought that Michael obtained this darkwood from a secret organization who has now tracked down their experiment to the elven village. After all, only a secret organization could have successfully revived the lost art of growing darkwood from scratch. So, your thinking went to a secret organization before you thought I grew the darkwood on my own? He asked, bemused at her line of thinking. She scoffed at his reaction. It's as if he thought she was the crazy one. Of course. Why would anyone think that a human boy, barely a teen, was able to achieve what millions of elves weren't able to do in thousands of years? Now that she laid it out like that, her conspiracy theory about a secret darkwood farming organization seemed like a more reasonable explanation than the truth. Oh well, that's not true. I planted that darkwood, he said nonchalantly. Lady Farron just stared at him, her mouth open in disbelief. How did you grow darkwood? Well, I followed a book step by step. Lady Farron slapped her own forehead. Oh, you just followed a book. Why didn't we think of that? She said sarcastically. She experienced firsthand all the heartache and disappointment that their kingdom experienced when they tried to grow darkwood. In their thousands of years of history, every single attempt ended up in a miserable failure, some even turning into complete fiascos. It was such a forlorn project that most elves ended up quitting their attempts because they got too depressed and crestfallen from their constant failures. By complete chance, someone was able to reach the halfway point of the darkwood's growth cycle. But when they tried to replicate the circumstances that led to that breakthrough, down to the last-minute detail, they still failed to repeat it again. This delicate, mercurial plant seemed to be governed by completely arbitrary rules. It came to a point where many began to believe that their god forsook and cursed them with never being able to reproduce darkwood ever again. But now, a human boy was able to grow it himself, in an environment completely disparate from the Elven Kingdom, the place where darkwood was supposed to have originated from. It didn't make sense. Where did you even grow this? In my pocket dimension, he replied. It's easier to control the environment there. But we tried that. He shrugged. Mine's special. She, of course, was still filled with a lot of questions, most of which concerned the veracity of his story itself. So, Michael decided to invite her over to his isolated room. A vague silhouette of the drone suddenly appeared in Farron's vision. It had dropped its invisibility, with the hexagonal spots on its frame shifting its hues to become more metallic. My heavens! Was that always here? He let her digest her surprise before inviting her over to the pocket dimension. With a simple touch on the drone's miniature door, she was transported inside an unfamiliar and alien room filled with monitors and button-filled desks around her. Still speechless, she was led towards the isolated room, where he showed her the CCTV footage of all 8 rooms growing darkwood inside. She pulled her face closer to the screen, thinking it was a window. That's darkwood. Not only that, but the intertwined spire of dark brown vine that bursted out of the ground was almost 2 meters in height. It was already past the halfway mark. This was already better than anything the Elven Kingdom was able to produce. And he had 8 of them all simultaneously flourishing in that isolated room. This wasn't a fluke. Michael could have only achieved this through a methodical cultivation. How? She wondered, curiosity overcoming her shock. Come inside. I'll show you. He led her to the isolated room, where she came face to face with the nascent darkwood. Immediately, the fans installed on the walls whirred into action, fanning cool air to displace the natural warmth that their bodies produced. Darkwood are very delicate creatures. Their environment must be perfect. These machines installed around it automatically adjust the parameters of the room to the perfect environment that they can flourish in. Farron gawked at the systems he had in this farm. She now realized how inadequate their precautions were when they grew their own darkwood. They seemed amateurish compared to what he'd been doing. In a few weeks, all 8 darkwood will be ready to harvest. Think I can sell it to you? Think? I'll buy them all. In fact, I'll pay for them right now, Lady Farron said. Michael smiled at her enthusiasm. As expected, he found a possible business venture that could net him millions of sand dollars in a single month. Are you sure? I'm fine with you paying after you receive the darkwood. You're a trustworthy guy, right, Michael? Yes, I am, he said, bumping his chest in pride. Oh, and it's Keo. How could she forget that he had a secret identity to uphold? Lady Farron walked through the ancient, sundry elven items displayed in this storage room. Her hands caressed the glass enclosure of a long, rectangular vitrine containing a row of primeval bows that still looked powerful despite the obvious signs of aging in their frames. You don't know how much help you'll give us with your contribution. With a steady supply of darkwood, we can finally arm ourselves with powerfully sufficient and consummate bows. Darkwood was a dilemma for elves. They were simultaneously a culturally significant antique that must be protected, and also a powerful weapon equivalent to a modern firearm in their arsenal. If they used it to empower themselves, it could inevitably be lost or stolen. But if they kept it in a vault for safekeeping, then they'd be wasting its game-changing potential. Lady Farron had to strike a perfect balance. That was why she first decided to fill this cabinet with darkwood before she considered using some of it to arm her guards. By her estimate, it would take her close to half a year, or even double that if their luck was bad. But with Michael's ingenious farming method, they don't have to wait that long. They just needed a few more weeks. The gods have not forsaken us. Lady Farron praised the ground, showing obeisance to the giant acacia for this miracle. She prostrated and kissed the ground, mumbling prayers and thanks under her breath. This might have seemed excessive, but from her perspective it was only natural. This was nothing less than a tangible gift from the gods. It wasn't just because Michael could give them 8 darkwood by the end of the month, but that he could do that in perpetuity. Given enough time, he'd be able to solve the darkwood scarcity for all elves. "I will forever be in your debt," she said. "You can treat me as your adherent. All the elves under me will treat you with the utmost respect." And just like that, Michael had another beastfolk alliance under his banner. It was the easiest decision in Lady Farron's life. The Reborn company didn't just have the only verifiable darkwood farm in existence, but they also brought forth the chosen one from a myth to a tangible status. Shina's existence was still unacknowledged by most elves, but that would quickly change once they met the bow-slinging dragonborn. "Wow, really? This was already set in stone the moment you bequeathed this magnificent weapon to me," Lady Farron said as she stood in front of a display cabinet in the middle of the room. This vitrine only showcased one item, the compound bow. Its lustrous, mechanical nature was incongruous to the rest of the bows on display. It was pristine. "I spend most of my nights here just to gaze at its magnificence," she said, stroking the glass case of the anachronistic compound bow. "Why don't you use it? You can't just let this beast decay in a vault." She chuckled. "We know, but its user is quite an obstinate brat. You'd know, you met her." "Lyra?" he asked, surprised. "How did that happen?" "You see, we elves believe that a bow has a soul of their own. Just like a living being, it has its own rights and opinions, including choosing its own bearer. Because of the bow's significance, I wanted to choose a suitable elf to become its wielder. Stalwart, courageous, intrepid, all the characteristics of a perfect soldier. But on the day of choosing, the compound bow got lost. Lyra stole it. Of course, I was mad at first, but wouldn't you know it, the bow chose her. It refused to be drawn by any other elf." Michael raised his eyebrows. "Really? This was weird because he made that bow. He knew its ins and outs. He didn't install a verification system that locked everyone out except a single user. But Lady Farron nodded and verified it. Does it really have a soul of its own, he wondered. The other mithril weapons certainly didn't have that supernatural trait. It was only this specific compound bow. Could it be the darkwood? Perhaps the combination of both mythical materials brought about a nascent form of sentience within the weapon itself. But if this is true, then this should mean that Shina's bow also has a sentience of its own. He wanted to test this out, but immediately rejected the idea. Everyone knew how the white ghost of Reborn would react upon anyone trying to take her beloved weapon. She wouldn't even let the dwarves do maintenance on it. Well, at least the bow chose her, right? Yeah, it would have been good if she used it. After that, she hated touching the weapon again. I don't even know why she stole it in the first place if she didn't want to use it, Lady Farron complained exasperatedly. The obstinate girl was quite a rambunctious and complicated little brat. TSK. She should be using it more. Or else the curse could. Lady Farron quickly stopped herself once she realized she muttered her complaint out loud. But Michael already heard it. Curse? She nodded. Yes. Truth be told, Lyra had quite a difficult childhood. She lost her parents early on due to an unexpected assault by the Zephyrs, turning her into an orphan before she could even draw a bow. And as if fate couldn't have made it harder on her, just when she was about to be adopted by another family, she exhibited signs of having a cursed Dao heart. Due to the hopeless and costly nature of the curse, her supposed new parents chose not to go ahead with the adoption, leaving her in the care of the kingdom instead. In their care, she may have gotten all the resources she needed to survive, but none of the critical nurture that she needed to grow. And the Elven Kingdom seemed to have given up on a cure as well. They sent her here in a foreign land to either miraculously find a cure or... Michael turned silent, reevaluating all of his interactions with Lyra. Everything finally made sense why she was the way she was. With such a troubled past, it was no wonder why she became troubled. But wait, I didn't see any signs of the curse. He saw signs of a disease in her body, but her heart was perfectly healthy. It wasn't like Nixie's case, where her heart was just mere inches away from rupturing. She doesn't sound ill. As unbelievable as it was, her curse was cured. Somehow, binding with the compound bow healed her of her affliction. This was very different from how Nixie got cured. Michael had to go into her mind's void and talk with an eldritch, cosmic horror of a beast to wake her up from a coma. Those were tumultuous times, which ended in Cthulhu giving him what he believed to be Mariana's jewel, the harbinger of the apocalypse. In comparison, Lyra's road to recovery was a cakewalk. I guess each case is different, but lately, it's been worrying me because I don't know if her curse will come back or not. All is well with her now, but that girl refuses to practice regularly with the compound bow. It's as if she's tempting fate. Michael pursed his lips. I feel sorry, he said. Can you give this to her? He reached down into his shadow and took out the pink teddy bear and the spinning top from his inventory. She needed a childhood. He explained to Lady Farron about his encounter with the enigmatic girl. I see, well, give it to her yourself, she said. Let's go. It's about time for me to give her a stern talking to. She led Michael out of her house and back down into the municipal hall of the Elven village. According to her, Lyra frequented the vines during her spare time since there were a lot of empty rooms she could hide in. On the way there, they met up with the male elven guard that Michael met earlier. It turned out that he was Lady Farron's personal assistant, someone who handled her day-to-day clerical work. Make a village-wide announcement about our new alliance with the Reborn company, she said to the male elf. And before the male elf could argue, she added, They're the company who gave us the compound bow. Ah! He clapped in excitement. Then this is a cause for celebration. The man whistled with both his hands, producing a melodic cadence that reverberated throughout the gargantuan acacia forest. It wasn't long before the elven guards stationed around the village aimed their bows up at the trees and released a fast-flying arrow that perfectly hit the strange red melon-like fruits hanging on the acacia branches. They exploded upon being hit, releasing a colorful array of fibrous puffballs that cascaded into the ground like confetti. The elves immediately dropped what they were doing and began to celebrate and cheer. They didn't know the reason for this commemoration, but they participated nonetheless. Congratulations, Michael. The elves will forever be your allies, Lady Farron declared. Michael smiled, feeling a sense of exultation and happiness. He achieved what he wanted and more. Michael? Who's that? They all turned around, and Michael felt his heart stop. It was Katarina. Michael knew he shouldn't have celebrated too soon. Now, he was currently stuck in a dangerous mire of exaggerated proportions. She knew him as Keo, Professor Lichtenstein's only protégé. This allowed him to keep close to Katarina and slowly peel off the mystery that surrounded her real identity, as well as the organization that she was under. Katarina and the professor were both part of this top-secret organization that seemed to be dealing with mysteries and war that ran rife around the world. Based on the secrecy involving their organization, he guessed that they may be tackling topics that could change the world itself. He wanted to know that. He wanted to be a part of the conversation. But he wasn't going to find out the truth if Katarina found out he was lying about the whole thing. He knew that he couldn't keep the lie forever, but he hoped that it would last long enough for the professor to recover and voluntarily tell him the truth about everything. But it seemed that the option was now out of his hands. The cat was out of the bag. This left him with only two choices: come out clean and hope that she would still trust him, or double down on his lie. He would have immediately chosen the latter option. However, it didn't seem like a good idea to tell a lie at a nascent spirit realm cultivator right to their faces. Then, he looked at Katarina and saw her face furrowed and serious. Her gaze was constant, with a countenance of someone who seemed to have an inexorable drive to get something. "Oh, did she find out? Katarina," he muttered, about to tell her something. But then he noticed. Her gaze actually wasn't directed at him. Her eyes were pointed in his direction, but much further down than his face. He followed her fervid glare and saw that she was looking at his hands, particularly the very hand that was holding the pink teddy bear that he was supposed to give to Lyra. He moved his hand, and Katarina's eyes moved in tandem with his motion. Katarina's gaze followed the pink teddy bear with a fervent focus, as if she was both simultaneously angry and covetous towards it. He could see her struggling, trying to restrain herself from coming towards him and taking the bear out of his hands. It was only now that he realized that her gaze wasn't actually a hostile glare, but a passionate aggression to something cute. "Do you want this bear?" he asked, gesturing the enchanting pink toy towards her. Her eyes widened for a second, before she immediately took a step back and shook her head. "What? No, I don't want that thing. It's not cute at all." Michael would have believed her vehement rejection, if not for the red blush warming her cheeks. And even as she turned away from the toy, its beguiling rainbow eyes seemed to attract the corner of her eyes all the same. Something about this toy riveted her and besotted her into becoming a younger, less mature version of herself. No way. Is she secretly a softie? Michael had been treating Katarina as some kind of hardened, taciturn warrior that was more akin to a soldier than a princess. When he first met her, he was aghast at her nascent spirit realm power. Her ancient mien made him think that she was beyond the pleasures of the world, living the ascetic life and focused entirely on her own cultivation. After all, Katarina was very young for someone that had reached a stage that most would take decades to achieve. She must have spent her whole life devoted to growing her diva. But now, seeing her vulnerable and visceral reaction to something cute made him rethink his whole perception of her. Despite her demigodhood, she was more human than anyone here. Truth be told, it kinda made him excited. "Oh, so you don't want this teddy bear? That's good. This was supposed to be Lyra's gift anyway," he said, nonchalantly returning the teddy bear back in his shadow. Katarina lurched forward, her hands subconsciously reaching for the teddy bear before she slapped her own hands. "Yeah, that's fine." Michael inwardly smiled. He now felt incredibly thankful that he met Lyra, because without that girl's audacious demands, he would have never been able to completely upend the power dynamics between him and Katarina. Seeing her vulnerable side like this subverted all the natural fear and intimidation that came with being a nascent spirit realm cultivator. He now held all the cards. Not only that, but her strange, furtive obsession with the teddy bear successfully made her forget about his real identity. He took back the teddy bear lodged halfway in his shadow. "Oh, what's that? Are you saying something?" Secretly, he pressed the button on the toy's back, triggering a pre-recorded message. "I'm so happy to be your friend. Let's be together forever." A cute childish voice echoed out of the toy and directly pierced into Katarina's heart, staggering her. She squirmed in place, holding her mouth with both hands as she tried not to squeal. That toy was so cute. No amount of rigorous training and hardships could have ever prepared her for a situation like this. She was taught how to successfully dismantle an entire castle's defense systems deep in the night without anyone ever knowing. But they never told her how to resist a harmless, talking, pink toy. "Well, I love you too, little guy, but I can't be your friend forever. Sorry, but it looks like you're going to have to stay in my shadows till we find you a suitable partner." Katarina's eyes widened, indignant. How could he stomach sending something so cute and adorable fettered in a cold, lifeless subspace? It was a crime against humanity. Michael looked up at Katarina, ostentatiously realizing something. "Oh, maybe you'd like to be his friend." Once again, he offered the toy in her direction. No, I can't," she refused, fully turning away her body. She wouldn't be able to resist otherwise. He pushed the teddy bear closer towards her. "It's fine. You can take him if you want." She quickly turned around and slapped the teddy bear from his hands. It crashed into the ground and rolled down a small hill into a muddy puddle below. This gained a few audible gasps from the elves watching them. Michael quietly retrieved the teddy bear, cleaning its fuzzy skin of dirt and grime. Unfortunately, there was now a permanent brown mark on its forehead after it splashed into the mud. He shrugged. Okay, if you don't want it then fine. Katarina remained with her back turned against him, her expression obscured. We have to find the antique, she muttered under her breath. Ahem. The silence was only broken once Lady Farron cleared her throat. She cast a furtive glance at Michael, not knowing what to do. She's right. That's what we were here for in the first place. We need to find the antique. Katarina? The nascent spirit cultivator was currently downcast, preoccupied with her own thoughts. Her wistful gaze was still focused on the now dirted pink teddy bear. Then, she shook her head, ridding herself of that tantalizing object. It's about this dragonborn. She began to tell Lady Farron about what they heard from Bastine, as well as their very motive in finding him. The antique. Do you know him? Michael asked. Lady Farron nodded, giving an exasperated sigh. Yes. I'm familiar with Romeo Flameheart. With the resources that Draconians had, I'm sure that you could have negotiated darkwood from them in exchange for what he wanted. She shook her head. What he wants is me. He has been after my hand for quite some time, but I am not interested in him. Michael was flabbergasted. He didn't think that Lyra's words were actually true. The draconian Romeo Flameheart was actually a lovelorn fool. But if it's important to you, then I shall request a meeting with him, Lady Farron promised. They finally made some headway to finding the second antique. But somehow only he was in a jubilant mood. Katarina sulked by herself, her eyes unfocused, not even realizing what had happened. Romeo Flameheart chanced upon the second antique after he accidentally exhumed it during one of his adventures. Many had tried and failed to acquire this antique for him, since he wanted no monetary recompense in exchange. Instead, he seemed to have had an obsession regarding something that the elves had. Michael wanted that antique, but he knew that he was never going to get a meeting with the eccentric draconian, on account of several others trying and failing to do the same thing. So, the only thing that he could do was obtain what he wanted from the elves and hope that it would be enough of a favor to at least get him in the door of his dragon tower. But as it turned out, the reason why he'd been stubbornly visiting the elven village was due to an ardent love he had for Lady Farron. Unlucky for him, that love was unrequited. He'd been spurned at the door multiple times with no signs of progress or success. At least until now. Lady Farron graciously agreed to meet with Romeo on the condition of having two guests by her side, namely Michael and Katarina. She also explicitly stated that this meeting was in no way, shape, or form romantic, just a simple get-together. She sent her letter through a messenger pigeon, and without even an hour later, it came back with a response. He's agreed to the terms, Lady Farron stated as she scanned the letter. Despite the clear platonic nature of this letter, Romeo still agreed. After all, progress was still progress, no matter how small. She had never even agreed to meet with him before, so this was a huge step in his mind. Thank you for this, Michael said sincerely. It's nothing. It's the least I could do since I almost revealed your giant secret. They both turned to look at the municipal hall. Katarina had excused herself an hour ago, stating that she was feeling unwell. Since she was a guest, she got her own room inside just like Michael. They were both going to stay here until the meeting with Romeo. And besides, Lady Farron continued, this will give me the chance to reject him once and for all. Michael cast a furtive glance at Lady Farron, but she seemed to have noticed it. You want to ask why I keep rejecting him? Kinda. She shrugged. I am simply too focused on my work. Finding darkwood is my priority. It's everyone's. Romance is not the reason why I traveled halfway across the world. Michael turned silent. He didn't agree with her line of thinking, especially since the drought of darkwood was over thanks to his farm. But he kept silent. Everyone had their own reasons for closing themselves off from indulging something, including Katarina. The last vestiges of the setting sun painted the entire elven village into a warm orange hue. Michael was in his room in the municipal hall, sprawled on the bed, ready for the next day to come. In the end, they couldn't find that little girl Lyra. He even searched through the vines, but to no avail. She seemed to have found a hiding place that even he couldn't see through. She was probably too busy tinkering with her new phone to practice again. Kids these days always stuck on their phones. He turned to the side, looking at the wall separating his room from Katarina's. He didn't mean to peek, but he saw her mana signatures through his supreme talent. She was sitting on the corner of her bed, hugging her knees with a grimace on her face. He turned to the other side and saw the pink teddy bear sitting on the nightstand beside the bed. It looked at him with its rainbow eyes and ever-present smile. "What? I did what I could." The teddy bear was silent. "She's the one that slapped you. Why are you the one chastising me?" Michael looked at the dirty patch in its forehead and exasperatedly sighed. Somehow, he was the one getting blamed even though he was just trying to do the right thing. "You know what?" He turned around and closed his eyes. It was better to sleep than deal with this nonsense. It's making him crazy. Deep into the night, the entire elven village was wrapped in darkness. The only source of light came from the bioluminescent vines and sunflowers that were sparsely installed all around the forest. A shadowy figure stood above Michael's bed, their presence almost non-existent. They extended their hands towards the sleeping Michael, blurring at lightning-quick speed. But instead of him, the hand went towards the side of the bed instead. As this shadowy figure came closer, their face was finally illuminated by the glow-in-the-dark sunflower in the nightstand. It was Katarina, and her eyes were focused on the dirted teddy bear sitting quietly on the wooden desk. She snatched it from the nightstand, her eyes widening as she finally grasped at this magnificent creature with her own two hands. A flurry of emotions ran through her body as she felt the fuzzy skin of the teddy bear in her hands. She felt excitement, cute aggression, and a deep pang of regret. Her hands caressed the dirty spot on its forehead and bit her lips. Just then, Michael moved, turning his body to the side. And in the next moment, Katarina was gone. And with her was the pink teddy bear. She was now running through the thick branches of the gargantuan acacia trees, moving further and further away from the village. Only once she reached the outskirts of the forest did she finally stop. Here, there was no one around her, no one to witness what she was about to do. Standing atop the tallest branch, Katarina looked at the teddy bear in her hands. With her hands shaking, she finally let go of all repressed emotions. She hugged the teddy bear tightly in her chest and squealed. In a pristine, austere white room devoid of any furniture or windows stood a little girl wearing a simple pale gown. "Where's Dad?" the little girl asked. "He's busy with something important, dear." She looked up. "Why?" "His research will end up saving the world from ruin. Once it's done, everyone in the world will become happy and free." The little girl looked down, pursing her lips. She heard that promise a million times before. "But what about you, Mom? Can't you play with me?" The woman wearing a bronze cuirass and terrages jutting out of her shoulders caressed the little girl's cheeks. "My work is important too, Catty. I'm out there disciplining bad guys, making sure they can't do bad ever again." The little girl crossed her arms around her chest for comfort. "But what about me?" A warm hand touched the little girl's heart. "You have an important job too, dear. Inside you is a powerful weapon we call the Godforge piece. When you grow up, it's going to be your source of strength that can help you defeat all the bad guys in the world, just like me." The little girl looked up at her mother, her face full of hope and excitement. "Really? If I become as strong as you, will I finally be with you and Dad forever?" Her mother hid the grimace in her expression. "Yes, dear." Then, the woman turned around and took out something from her back, holding it tight in her hands. "Open your hands, sweetie." The little girl did as she was told, and a vaguely humanoid straw dummy plopped into her hands. "This is my gift to you. Keep it close with you at all times, and it will feel like your father and I are always by your side." Cradling the straw dummy into her chest, the little girl smiled. "Okay, Mom." Katarina gazed wistfully at the pink teddy bear in her hands, a single teardrop falling into its fuzzy skin. She wiped her moist eyes and laughed at herself. On this quiet night, all she wanted to do was hold it in her hands and find comfort and solace that she hadn't felt in a long, long time. "Everything's okay as long as I'm with you?" the teddy bear said, having its voice box inadvertently triggered. "Hee hee, you're so cute," she muttered under her breath. This was the first time she'd seen something so lovingly sweet and adorable. Its beguiling smile charmed her to no end. How could she resist something like this? Anyone who knew her personally would find it extremely uncharacteristic of her to act so besotted and feminine. She knew that. That's why she rejected it in the first place. But right here in her lonesome in the deep dead of night, no one could see her become vulnerable. Or so she thought. Leaves rustled in the distance, forcing her to awaken from her stupor. Her muscles grew taut, her hands clawed and ready to grasp at this ungainly visitor in the darkness. And with her nascent spirit cultivation, no one stood a chance against her assault, especially one that could have possibly seen her so vulnerable. Her entire body disappeared, reappearing on the opposite branch on the other side of the tree. Her claw-like hands were just mere moments away from crushing the throat of this shifty intruder. "Wait, Katarina!" After hearing her name being called out, she immediately stopped and yanked on the trespasser's wrist. And just as she expected, hidden underneath their black sleeves was a tattoo of a golden sun with 8 distinct rays, depicting the 8 elemental mana of the world. "You're one of us," she realized. The hooded figure nodded, massaging his neck, which was only mere moments away from breakage. "Did you see anything?" she asked him, her eyes glowing with a threatening glare. "Saw what? I just arrived." Katarina looked down at his chest, feeling an even rhythm in his heartbeat. He was telling the truth. If he had seen her with the pink teddy bear, then there was no quelling her anger and fury. "Why are you here?" she questioned. No one was supposed to visit her while she was on a mission. "It's urgent, Miss Katarina. We have seen signs of their activity here in New Sparta. They're deploying their troops." Those people never acted spontaneously. They were meticulous in their planning, executing it only when they're sure of their success. After all, they prided themselves in keeping their name in obscurity. They struck hard and fast, leaving before anyone even knew they were there. The fact that they were already deploying their troops meant that they were already past the point of planning and setups. They were ready to pounce. Just then, a thunderous explosion rang out from deep inside the forest, briefly illuminating the whole elven forest with a red incandescent light. She turned her head into the direction of the explosion. Only there was no doubt about it. They were attacking the elven tribe. Immediately, Katarina felt a tingle in her neck. Her hair stood on end. The prospect of them being in such close proximity to her awakened a deep, visceral, and feral reaction from her body. She couldn't believe she was so stupid. She should have seen all the signs. The worst part was that if she hadn't left to the outskirts of the forest, she could have seen their attack and stopped it before it happened. She could have prevented all of this if she hadn't let herself become vulnerable. She shook her head. The battle was not over. Resolved to rectify her mistake, Katarina disappeared into a blur. And as she raced towards the village, there were 2 questions running through her mind. What did they want with the elves? And how could they have infiltrated the forest so deep as to attack them right in the heart of their village? Katarina arrived back in the elven village and saw everything in the forest engulfed in an infernal fire. The solemn, gargantuan guardians of the forest were caught in an insidious fire, turning its bark into incandescent coal and its leaves as fuel for its growth. Elves ran amok, trying their damnedest to quell the spread of chaos by dousing the tree with water arrows. But their efforts were in vain. No normal water can extinguish this fire laden with ability power. Guards tried to guide the elves into safety, but their tumultuous screams were only getting drowned out by the crackling of fire. Panic and hysteria spread across as the elves saw their own houses become lit up with an insidious red fire. They were about to lose everything. "Keep calm," the guards shouted. "The fire will be doused soon. Believe in Lady Farron." Katarina scanned the entirety of the village, keeping her eyes peeled to see a glimpse of those treacherous bastards. He knew them well enough to know that this was only the start. This was a distraction to their real goal. They may be vile and corrupted, but they do not sow destruction just for the sake of it. This was deliberate. They wanted the elven village to be wrought in chaos. While the elves were busy putting out the fires, they would be striking from the shadows and retrieving their target without even anyone knowing they were there. That was their MO. The question was what? What was so important with the elves that they brought out a frontal assault? Just as she thought that, she suddenly remembered. Keo. Michael was awoken by the initial explosion that shocked the village. It was hard not to, as the entire tree shook violently and almost caused the whole thing to careen to the side. What the hell? On the window overlooking the vista to the entire elven village, he saw nothing but fervid fire raging everywhere. He used his supreme talent and his drone vision to see his surroundings, and immediately, his whole vision became filled with a glowing, red-hot hue that only got intense as the fire spread. This fire is made out of ability power. This was obviously a severe case of arson caused by a powerful magnetic. The ferocity of the fire was too strong for it to have been a mistake. Wanting to get a better view of the situation, he ordered his drone to fly out into the air to take stock of what had happened. But before that happened, he heard another crashing sound echoing out of the hallway, as if someone had just kicked down a door. Then a second later, another door was forcibly opened, and then another and another, with their booming kicks getting louder and louder as they came closer to Michael's room. Eventually, his wooden door burst into splinters as a group of hooded men came into his room. There were 5 of them in total, all their faces obscured by a veil covering everything but their eyes. But even then, Michael could see the anxiousness in their expression. They were in a hurry, and judging by the multiple scanning glances they took around his room, it looked to him as if they were searching for something or someone. "Damn it, it's not here," one of the hooded figures cursed. Then, with a disgruntled, dismissed look at Michael, said, "Take care of this kid. No one should know we were here." All 5 figures glared at Michael, hostility radiating from their bodies. Their intention to kill was clear. Are they the vandals? They fit the elven guard's depiction exactly. And just as he expected, the vandals were ramping up their stunts into something much bigger, something much more devious so as to wreak fiery havoc upon thousands of innocent elves. This time they truly crossed the line. They crossed the Rubicon. There was no going back now. Immediately, ChatJK5 displayed a window overlaying on each of the vandals' faces showing their cultivation realms and their ability powers. His eyes widened. Unknown assailant. 5th stage body formation realm. Talent. Artificial strength. Ability power. The user gains control over an infernal fire, which can burn everything and persevere beyond the limits of nature. Artifice detected. That last line was critical. All of them had the same talent and ability power, and all used artifice as an expedient for achieving a reality-bending power. This was no coincidence. They were no ordinary vandals. This meant that this attack was premeditated by someone else, the Fostil Company or at least someone similar to them. It all made sense now. Their previous pranks were simply a gauge to test the elves' defense systems. First, they limited their attacks on the outskirts of the forest, trying to see the strengths and weaknesses of the elven guards. Once they found a suitable breach in their defenses, they moved closer, attacking the garden monuments as their final preparation before eventually setting their sights on the very village itself. And today, they successfully besieged it with an uncontrollable fire. It was a perfectly executed cerebral plan to set up something a lot more nefarious. A heist of critical proportions. "Who are you people?" he asked them. But these hooded figures remained silent until one of them raised their hands and pointed it in his direction. "You don't deserve to know, cretin. You only deserve to perish under our fire." A blazing, humanoid figure appeared above all of them, exhibiting the same diva and power. But strangely, this figure didn't look realistic. The flames surrounding the diva looked drawn and animated, as if it was constructed through a 2D animation software. However, the hooded figures didn't give him the time to investigate. A billowing beam of fire shot out from the hooded figure's hands, reaching halfway into the ceiling before it solidified, forming into a fiery club in their grasp. They lunged at Michael, intending to bash his head into the nether realm. But unbeknownst to them, 15 drones shimmered around the room, their cannons glowing with a prismatic light. One of the hooded men struck Michael with his infernal bat, creating a flurry of sparks upon contact. The entire room became lit with a reddish hue, consuming everything inside the acacia tree into a hellish landscape. Those little sparks were enough for everything to catch an inexorable and incessant fire. Even the non-combustible material inside the room became fuel for it to grow in intensity even further. The hooded men, with their infernal bats, began bashing everything inside the room, intending to burn everything asunder. By the time they were done with it, there would be no evidence left of their presence. Everything would turn into ashes. At least that's what they thought. The hooded figure who struck first felt his infernal bat start to quiver and shake. Its animated, wavy fire began to recoil upon itself, as if it was being repulsed by something much more chaotic, more destructive than itself. Then, like ice in front of an oven, his infernal bat began to melt, revealing that the golden-haired child remained unscathed with his attack. A spherical prismatic shield surrounded Michael, its indomitable light searing off any fire that came close. The fire that was supposed to burn through anything and everything began to wither into a wisp. What? Michael cracked his neck nonchalantly. But his undaunted behavior in the face of all this chaos was not the reason why the hooded figure felt fear. It was because of the figure shimmering above Michael. A disembodied metallic figure, wearing complex, vigorous, and mechanical armor presented itself among the fervid fire. Its stately appearance was unperturbed by the chaos of the room, its vambrace, chest plates, and shoulder guards moving like a living organism just waking up from its slumber. This diva had no head, yet the hooded figure felt its potent stare piercing through the veil of reality, creating a tangible pressure in his cold, dead heart. "No, that's not possible," the hooded figure muttered. This little boy's diva he must be in the 7th stage of body formation. Confusion and fear flashed across the hooded figure's eyes. A prodigy of this level was not in their plans. No one even knew a talent of this level was hiding amongst the elves. "I'm going to have to ask you some questions, and you'll do your best to answer. What is artifice?" Michael's words sent a spine-chilling shiver across all the 5 hooded figures. Immediately, they turned towards him with a ghastly expression. "How does he know? Who's behind you? Is it the Faux-Still Company? Who is seditious?" The hooded figure clicked his tongue. "You should have kept your mouth shut, boy. No one who knows our secret will get to live a happy life or an easy death." His cohort supported him by flourishing their infernal clubs. "Your cultivation is no match against the 5 of us. Kill him." They rushed towards Michael, clubs blazing, when all of a sudden, multiple prismatic beams shot from the smoke-filled ceilings. The beams hit all 5 hooded figures, staggering them backwards. The 2D animated fire divas above their head incurred a giant hole in their torsos, having felt the pain that their users incurred as well. "Kurg!" the hooded figure groaned, looking up at the black smoke billowing up to the ceiling. Michael stepped forward. "None of you are going to be able to leave until you tell me who you work for." Behind him, several points of light appeared through the swelling smoke and fire. Another 5 unity guns shot towards the hooded figures. This time, they were able to defend themselves with their infernal bats. Nonetheless, the prismatic beams pierced through the solidified fire and accurately hit the hooded figures, albeit with a lessened effect. "Damn it, destroy whatever the hell that is." The hooded figures began to wave their clubs around in the smoke, aimlessly trying to destroy those wicked weapons that kept on pestering them with that weird, piercing attack. Unfortunately for them, their efforts were not only in vain, but it left them vulnerable to attack. More Unity guns shot from around the room, all 15 mini-drones taking their turns with their shots and cooldowns. The hooded figures fumbled, stumbled, and floundered as they became target practice for the mini-drones. Michael watched as his weapons demolished the hooded figures by making them look like Swiss cheese. In a matter of less than a minute, these overconfident and overzealous arsonists laid on the ground, blood spilling all over them. "Are you going to tell me now?" The difference in power between them was clear. In truth, Michael's 7th-stage cultivation wouldn't have been able to defeat 5 5th-stage magnetics all by himself so fast and so easily. But with the help of his mini-drones, the result was obvious. The hooded figures' eyes turned from indignant fury to fear and trepidation. They failed, and they knew only victors get to return. Their eyes quickly changed into a rabid, almost fanatical gaze. "Who are you?" Michael grabbed at the hooded figure's mask and wrenched it out. He staggered, seeing a completely scarred face indistinct of any features. It looked like he had been burnt from the head down to his feet. "Ha ha ha ha. You'll never know." All the hooded figures suddenly grabbed at their own chests, their fingers digging into their own skin and bones. What came out of the cuts was not blood, but a dark, tenebrous light instead. And despite the fervid fire burning everything into ashes, the gash on their chests began to emit a misty frost. Michael immediately knew what they were doing. They were trying to self-destruct. His mini-drones shot towards him at their fastest speeds, a compartment under their frame immediately opening up to release switches and mass. He didn't want to let these hooded figures go that easily. Multiple iron blocks attached themselves to each hooded figure, their bodies immediately seizing upon contact. For a brief moment, things turned serene. But not before Michael felt a much stronger power cut off his control over the hooded figures. The switches peeled off and the bodies were free to explode. Michael's entire body tensed, his absolute unity defense immediately thickening to the expected atomic explosion that was about to go off. And these were artifices from 5 5th-stage magnetics. Suffice it to say, the explosion would be enough to level the entire elven forest completely. Even with his prismatic shield, he wouldn't come out of this unscathed. The mini-drones immediately buzzed as they moved to form a solid wall in front of Michael. But it was too late. The hooded figures emanated a cool, blue glow before everything was engulfed in a blinding light. Michael braced himself tightly into a curl. Then, a thunderous tremor rumbled through the entire room, and nothing else. The expected destructive tempest that would have blown everything asunder was non-existent. Instead, a deafening silence permeated the room. Michael opened his eyes and saw a giant sphere of pure energy where the hooded figures were supposed to be. It looked like a miniature sun, with flares and flaming spirals storming around on its surface. And right next to it was a dark-haired woman with her right hand extended and her left hand grasping a pink teddy bear. It was none other than Katarina Petrovich. But there was something distinctly different about her. Her hair was flowing outwards uncontrollably, as if they were tendrils that were searching for her prey. A circlet made of pure diamond sat squarely on her forehead, its center containing a gem-shaped ruby that glowed red with immense and fervid power. Protecting her torso was a cuirass made out of layered, lamellar crystals that were stitched together by non-existent string. On her arms were a single, solid piece of diamond vambrace that seemed to have come out from her skin itself. And on her waist were terrages made out of long, crystals acting as a skirt that went slightly above her knees. And on her feet were a pair of soleret that perfectly fit the rest of her armor, diamond-like and incredibly sturdy. And under the ionizing red light of the fire around them, her entire armor set reflected a prismatic shine similar to that of a disco ball. Michael dazedly stared at her countenance, amazed and intimidated at the same time. Her Spartan mane conflated with the alluring, grand, opulent diamonds of her armor, creating a perfect mix that made her seem like an otherworldly warrior of the gods. He held his breath, not because of her dazzling appearance, but because of the intense ability power that was oozing out of her. It was fervid almost to the point of being suffocating. He didn't even want to look at her using his drone vision because he knew that her ability power would only manifest as an intense light that would literally blind him in both eyes. And even when her power wasn't directed at him, he could feel a tangible pressure emanating from her that was as fundamental as gravity or physics itself. The urge to bow down and show her obeisance was incredibly strong. It felt like the most natural thing he should do, like an instinct. It was a natural effect from being in such close proximity to Katarina herself. And that was because of what she wore. That diamond armor. That was a diva. That was her diva, manifested in the real world. It was no longer a disembodied image floating above her head. It now had a corporeal form that had melded into her body, into her very core. She and her diva were one and the same. They had unified. This was the real nascent spirit realm. Katarina extended her hand, controlling the explosion and maintaining it as if it was in the palm of her hands. She began to close her fist, and the miniature sun began to grow smaller, becoming more condensed through the pressure in her hands. In the nascent spirit realm, her ability powers were no longer abstract. They were real. They manifested as physical strength, with ability power flowing through her body instead of out. It allowed a simple closing of her fist to contain, suppress, and quell an atomic explosion that would have leveled a huge chunk of New Sparta itself. And with a bit more pressure, the explosion became smaller and smaller, its light going from an intense red to a more pallid white. Katarina definitively closed her hand, and the miniature sun imploded upon itself and became nothing more than a simple blip that dissipated in a few moments. Then, there was silence. The incessant fire that had been swallowing the whole room were starting to recoil, retreating back from whence they came. And as they did, the burned and charred wood began to regain their color. The insidious fire began vomiting everything they tore asunder, completely appending the chaos and disaster that the arsonists had created. Michael watched his surroundings begin to recover. Charred wood began to regain its moisture and color. The soot on the floor and ceilings began to recede, and the serene, stately ambience of the acacia tree began to recover. It wasn't like his reverse block. Time wasn't flowing backwards to turn everything back the way they were before. It was as if nature, or the insidious fire itself, was rectifying its erroneous mistake. It didn't have a guilty conscience. It was more like a troublesome kid having been forced to do community service after being caught by the cops. "Nascent spirit," he muttered, completely shell-shocked. After having defeated 5 fifth-stage magnetics with barely any effort, he began to have thoughts of grandeur. But seeing and experiencing this with his own eyes was a wake-up call. He was still at the bottom of the totem pole when it came to the real stuff. His foot was barely even in the door. It was clear now that the distance between him and Katarina wasn't just a few stages of cultivation. It was more akin to the space between galaxies instead. With her job finished, Katarina took a deep breath. Glowing white lights began to circle around her, obscuring her in a blinding brilliance that hid her entire body for a few seconds. Then the light subsided, and suddenly all the pressure inside the room disappeared. Michael found respite in the air, feeling his muscles relaxed and all the tension released. Katarina returned in his vision, with her dazzling diamond armor gone and replaced with her casual attire of a white tunic and pants. Michael almost wanted to laugh. The contrast between her ethereal nascent spirit form and her regular attire was even more disparate than night and day. Looking at her now made him think she was a normal human, as if she wasn't a demigod that could control an atomic explosion within the palm of her hands. "Phew, that was close," he said, breathing a sigh of relief. "You got here just in time." Katarina turned around, her countenance serious and confrontational, making him freeze up. "What happened here?" He shrugged, trying to keep his composure as he lied. "What?" They appeared out of nowhere and suddenly exploded. She crossed her arms against her chest, askance. "You're not telling me the whole truth. They wouldn't have self-destructed without reason." She stared at the blast mark on the ground, analyzing. Truth be told, she was unable to catch a glimpse at the hooded figures. She only felt their signature ability power spike up at the penultimate moments right before they exploded, which led her towards their location. Thankfully, that was just about enough time for her to arrive and contain it. But judging by the power of the explosion, the artifice they used must have been at least at the 5th stage level. That was weird. 5th stage artifice users were no longer just pawns that could be sacrificed whenever they wanted. They were a critical part of their organization akin to platoon leaders. They wouldn't have triggered their self-destruction unless they absolutely had to. But why? The only one here was Kyo. Only he could have fought against them. And by her estimation, there must be about 3 or more of those guys here. Kyo faced an elite group of assassins savagely trained with the subconscious intent to kill anything and everyone who got in their way. Their rigorous training would have allowed them to overcome any difference in cultivation just through pure teamwork. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that their group could have defeated a 9th stage magnetic under the right circumstances. Now, she originally believed that Kyo was nothing more than a defenseless geek like her father. But the fact that he was able to survive against an onslaught of this magnitude meant that he was a lot stronger than he was letting on. He must be a magnetic with a pretty considerable cultivation realm. This surprise was easy to digest. After all, there must have been a reason why her father chose him as his protégé. Strength and wisdom went hand in hand in tumultuous times like these. But that still didn't make sense. If she were to assume Kyo to be in the 9th stage of the body formation realm, which was already quite absurd given his age, it still wouldn't have explained what had happened. For those assassins to self-destruct, they must have felt that their doom was all but guaranteed. They must have been forced into a situation where escape was nary an option. Yet they should have been able to if they were only dealing with a single 9th stage magnetic. This was impossible, unless Kyo's strength exceeded that of the 9th stage. "You're not just a history student, are you?" she asked him. Michael took a deep breath and stood up, standing face to face with her. "You're right. I'm not telling the truth about myself. But you're not either." She kept silent, indignant and cagey. "They? So you know about them. You know about the artifice." Her eyes widened. She didn't expect to hear those words from him. Did her father tell him that? "You've got a lot of secrets up your sleeve, so it's only natural that I keep my secrets hidden too. Tell me about them and I'll tell you what you need to know," he said, his hands in akimbo. A secret for a secret. That was the only proper exchange for information of this magnitude. Katarina, caught off guard by his aggressiveness, turned silent for a moment. Her curiosity burned thinking about how he defeated those assassins, but her logical reasoning suppressed that desire. She can't tell him about them. It's too dangerous. "So you're not going to tell me?" Michael asked again. Katarina stayed taciturn, letting the moment pass. After the tumultuous first few minutes of the hooded figure's assault, the elven village began to rally themselves into recovery. Lady Farron was at the forefront. With her arrows, the fires spreading across the gargantuan acacia forest began to be quelled. She and the rest of her guards worked in perfect synchronicity, extinguishing one patch of fire after another. The reason why it took this long was because they first made sure that the fire wouldn't spread outwards any further. They contained it in the vicinity of the village before extinguishing the rest of them. And it worked. Tens of minutes after the initial explosion shook the village, there were no fires left to extinguish. White smoke and mist rose to the skies, signaling the infernal fire's defeat. "Take stock of our villagers," she commanded her guards. "Make sure no one was hurt." Even after extinguishing the fire, the turbulent times were not over. Lady Farron immediately got to work on recovery, making sure that each and every villager was accounted for. She didn't care that the beautiful barks of their acacia forests turned into coal. All that mattered was everyone's safety. Then, she remembered her guests. She immediately rushed towards the municipal hall, seeing it strangely devoid of any burned marks and charred wood. She opened Michael's room, seeing an awkward standoff between him and Katarina. "What happened here?" Lady Farron asked. The room was in pristine quality, as if it hadn't been ravaged by the fire. But that wasn't the reason for her question. She could feel a palpable, almost hostile tension between Michael and Katarina bubbling under the surface. Michael sighed and turned away from Katarina. "It's nothing," he said, disgruntled. With Katarina staying silent, Lady Farron knew that it was not her place to say anything else. "I just wanted to make sure that both of you were okay. Those damned vandals have made it personal. It's frustrating me that no one has even seen a glimpse of them this whole time." Lady Farron began to unload all of her frustration at the situation. She was seething in hatred for them. Why would they even go this far? Just to sow chaos? At that moment, Katarina raised her head. "It's just a distraction." Farron turned to her. "What? The fire? Everything was done so that they could distract you and all the guards. Their motive must be something else, something heavily guarded." It didn't take long before Michael and Lady Farron both looked at each other. Darkwood. One of the only extremely valuable items in the Elven village was their collection of darkwood in the vault. Combined, there must be billions worth of sand dollars in there. "We don't have to worry," Lady Farron assured. "Our defenses are still in place. They couldn't have infiltrated the vault." However, Katarina knew that these were no ordinary vandals. They were extremely powerful and scrupulous in their attacks. They wouldn't have started their siege unless they had a way to access the vault. "It's better to check. We may even catch them in the act." Lady Farron didn't need convincing. The darkwood collection was far too valuable to be left alone, especially after the disaster that occurred here. Soon, the three of them traveled to Farron's main estate where there were numerous guards already stationed. "Are you sure no one came through here while we were away?" Lady Farron asked. "Yes, milady. I haven't left my post even after the explosion. I have not seen any signs of those vandals," the guard assured her. Nodding, Lady Farron briskly walked inside and immediately headed towards the spiraling staircase that led deeper into the heart of the gargantuan acacia tree. The guards made way for the three of them to enter, and soon, they found themselves inside the Museum of Ancient Elven Sundry Relics, most dating back to the ancient era itself. They headed over to the giant velvet-lined cabinet on the furthest wall, and Lady Farron released a sigh of relief. The darkwood laid in their containment, safe and untouched. Everything was accounted for, including the one Michael gave them. It seemed that the vandals' target wasn't the darkwood. But if it wasn't that, then what? Michael's footfalls rang through the vault as he slowly approached an empty vitrine. The glass case was currently open, with the cushion still having the heavy indent of the item. It was gone. The compound bow was stolen. Immediately, Lady Farron turned to look at the empty display case. Her face turned aghast. "No, no, no," she muttered. "The compound bow was the most important weapon in the entire Elven kingdom. It can't be lost. This is impossible. They couldn't have stolen it from here," she confidently argued. She then walked over to the vitrine and touched its glass case. An ethereal mist swirled around her finger, proving that its defense system was still in place. It hadn't been tampered with whatsoever. But how could they have stolen it? Michael's question wasn't really addressed towards Lady Farron, but towards Katarina instead. As he learned recently, it seemed that she knew a lot more about them than any of them here. Not even nascent spirit cultivators could have circumvented our elven spell without leaving any trace, Lady Farron assuredly declared. This was an indubitable fact. No stranger could have gotten the compound bow from the vault. Lady Farron stopped in the middle of her sentence, a sense of realization dawning over her. Her pointy ears began to curl downwards, a sign of harrowing distress for elves. "No, no, 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 no," she shouted, her face painted with consternation. She immediately walked back up the stairs, stomping her feet as she did so. She stopped in front of the guard, a mixture of hope and hopelessness in her eyes. Did she come here? Did she get the bow? The guard noticed the distress in Farron's eyes and swallowed uncomfortably. "Yes, she did, milady. Before the explosion, she retrieved the compound bow from the vault. She said she wanted to practice with it." A loud thundering crash echoed out into Farron's abode as she smashed her fist into the dining table. With her knuckles bleeding, Lady Farron kneeled, tears streaming from her face. Lyra. Damn it. Michael felt his chest getting hotter. We can still find her, right? Katarina? With her nascent spirit cultivation, everything was possible. But this time, there was a somber and gloomy expression on Katarina's face. The fact that their presence had disappeared completely from the elven village meant that they had successfully retrieved their target. They had the compound bow. And from experience, she knew that they left no survivors or witnesses. The outcome was most likely, "No, I have to find her. She's still alive," declared Lady Farron. "Tell me how we can find her." Katarina nodded. "I have a few acquaintances who can track them down. But they're crafty. Their escape plans are as meticulous as their setups. For all they knew, they could be halfway across the world right now. But she didn't mention that. There is no hiding place they can hide from. Even if it takes days, months, or years, we will find them," Katarina declared. "That you can trust." But Michael wasn't satisfied. That was too late. He didn't want to give up on Lyra. He closed his eyes and commanded his drones to spread out. Even if he had to scour the entire royal continent to find her, he would do just that. Ding! Just then, the phone on his pocket vibrated. Michael reached into his pocket and stared at his phone. Plastered on the screen was a notification regarding an urgent message from his own number. Message from Michael. He immediately clicked on the notification and found an image depicting a dark, obscure scenery. Almost half of the picture was black, as if whoever took it was hiding from a corner and could only take a furtive shot from a distance. This is from Lyra. He gave his phone to that girl just a few hours ago. He couldn't believe that the girl's unscrupulous habits ended up actually saving her life. The fact that she could send this picture to him meant that she was still alive and was at least in a position where she could furtively use her phone without being caught. And despite being only familiar with the phone for the first time, she had shown herself to be extremely savvy with the new technology. This wasn't an accidental send. She must have taken this image with the hopes of him finding her. What a clever little girl she was. His eyes focused on the screen as he tried to discern the vague shapes found in the left side of the image. Thankfully, ChatJK5 came in clutch by enhancing the contrast of the image and highlighting a few parts where the edges were hazy and blurry. Finally, he saw a clear picture. The image depicted a vista of a natural forest landscape from a perspective high up on the crest of a hill. Unfortunately, the trees were of the type commonly found in the royal continent, so this didn't really give him any more information. However, there were a few distinct terra formations that he could identify in the background, like a snaking river in the distance or the large rift separating the two chunks of tectonic plates. He didn't know where this was exactly, but it was a start. And perhaps the most important piece of information from this image were the shadowy figures gathered in the foreground. There was no doubt in his mind that they were the same hooded figures that sieged the elven village. And in this image, he saw a carriage convoy lined up and seemingly headed towards the very same chasm he saw in the background. Lyra was being taken into their stronghold. "Search every nook and cranny of the village," Lady Farron shouted to the guards. "Talk to the other quadrants and ask them if they saw anything. Tell them we'll give them anything in exchange." As she barked out orders, Lady Farron stumbled for a second, her knees giving out under her. She grimaced, trying not to wallow in despair and hopelessness. She had to focus on finding Lyra. She took a deep breath and tried to calm herself. Lyra was no pushover. She knew firsthand how difficult it was to deal with that little girl. Those vandals won't know what's coming to them. "It's okay. She's strong. She'll survive," she said to herself. Then, she felt a warm hand on her shoulders. She looked up, seeing Michael giving her reassurance. "You're right. She's a very strong girl," he said, showing her the image on his phone. Katarina and Lady Farron stared at the unusual metal brick in his hands. They could scarcely believe its features after he explained it to them, but it was not the time for questions. Did she really send that scene?" Lady Farron asked. "She sent it just a minute ago. She's still safe and sound." "Oh, my baby," Farron gasped, her eyes moist. Meanwhile, Katarina was still having a bit of trouble understanding the inner mechanism of the phone. After all, she knew how hard they worked to keep themselves in obscurity. They laboriously set up precautions to make sure that there were no magic or ability powers that could track them back to their stronghold. Yet, according to this image, Lyra was able to send a picture detailing the very moment that they were about to take her back into their very own lair. Heck, even their organization had a lot of trouble finding and tracking these strongholds. But now, there was physical evidence that basically gave them a verifiable map leading to their hideout. I already sent out someone to sweep the royal continent, Michael said, but it'll take a few hours at least. Lady Farron shook her head and took the phone from him. No, I know where this is. I've been here before. This was a tomb. During her travels in search of darkwood, Lady Farron braved a lot of tombs, inheritances, or underground mazes in the Queen's region. Of course, she wasn't able to visit all of them as some leads were simply better than others. And this particular underground maze was one of the ones she didn't visit. She was led to believe that there was nothing to be found under that chasm. According to most credible sources, the place was desolate. I know where this place is. Without waiting for anything else, Lady Farron briskly walked out of the door donning her bow and arrow in hand. Her face was filled with fervent determination. She was going to get Lyra back and make those bastards pay for everything they did to the elves. But just as she was about to leave, Michael pulled her back for a second. We're going to be dealing with an incredibly powerful group of people, he said. You better be prepared with the best weapon possible. He reached down into his shadows and retrieved an intricate, mechanical compound bow from his inventory. Lady Farron's eyes widened as she gazed upon such an amazing mithril artifact weapon. That's... Michael handed the weapon over to her. I had another spare. She looked at him, shocked, speechless. Who would have thought that Michael would bring out another national-level treasure so casually? I don't know what to say. Then don't. Wait till we rescue Lyra. He pushed the compound bow in her hands and walked out of the house. Meanwhile, Katarina stayed behind, only just now realizing that the bow was made out of mithril. Lady Farron gazed wistfully at her old wooden bow. This ancient, refurbished weapon had served her well throughout the years, but now, it was time for her to move on. She caressed the brown, intertwined darkwood vines and gently poured her Tao heart power inside it. Immediately, the bow string emanated a green light underneath all of its creases before the knots on its end began to untie and shrivel. The darkwood slithered through her hands, circling through her wrist and onto her arm, before crawling to the compound bow in her back. Darkwood and mithril, two mythical items thought to have been lost in time, began to feel each other's presence and resonate, creating a palpable cadence of beats in the ground. The intertwined dark vines automatically weaved itself on the compound bow's mechanisms, lengthening itself to fit perfectly to the weapon's needs. The string knotted itself, finishing the transfer of power. The difference was immediate. Both the natural aura of the darkwood and the mithril conflated with each other, creating a synergistic explosion that seemed to multiply the weapon's effective power. Katarina's hair stood on end. She had just witnessed the creation of one of the most powerful weapons she had ever seen. The nascent willpower and spirit of the weapon was effervescent. It was like a newborn monster just waiting to be unleashed with inexorable zeal. That compound bow matched the quality and power of their own weapons back in their organization. Theirs were ancient, well-preserved monsters that achieved its ferocity through thousands of years of history. Meanwhile, this weapon almost reached that same level of power while still being in its nascent, unadulterated stage. It still had room to grow. And this weapon was just casually given to Lady Farron by Michael. I had another spare, he said. Michael decided to pull out all the stops to rescue Lyra. His drone manifested in front of him, dropping its invisibility. This was their fastest means of transportation. Get in, he said to them. Katarina stared at the drone, confused. With a simple command, nanoparticles began to ooze out of the drone's frame, quickly increasing its size and volume to become 10 times its original size. Once again, Katarina stared at the drone, thousands of thoughts racing through her head. That's been here the entire time? Michael showed them the way inside the drone's pocket dimension, transporting all of them inside the control room. Lady Farron had already been inside the drone once, so she wasn't that shocked. "Show me the location," Michael said to her. He stood in front of a large table with a holographic 3D map of their current surroundings. And with an outward pinch, he zoomed out and showed the entirety of the Queen's region. Lady Farron studied it for a second before pointing to a location further north of New Sparta. Immediately, the drone took off into the skies and zoomed at incredibly fast speeds. And inside the control room, they saw the bountiful acacia forest of the elven village blur in the screens on the wall as they left New Sparta behind. With the new double-blade propeller upgrades, their speeds rivaled even that of jet engines. And as they reached higher in elevation, the drone's speed picked up even more as wind resistance lessened. Katarina silently watched her surroundings, seeing the landscape of the Queen's region blur beneath her feet. And within less than 10 minutes after their ascent, they finally reached the location on the image. He saw a small hill in the distance where the perspective would perfectly coincide with the image. "This is the place," Katarina declared. "How did you know?" he asked her. "Because I can't sense them." Michael piloted the drone to descend, eventually reaching the giant rift in the two tectonic plates in the land. From a cursory glance, it truly did seem like the place was totally desolate. He didn't see any signs of light mana signatures on the ground, nor did he see the heat signatures of magnetics. They all exited the drone, finding themselves standing on the very edge of a steep cliff overlooking the abyss. "Let me handle this," Katarina said. She raised her hand, obulty power oozing out of her very presence. Michael watched as a pristine, brilliant diamond vambrace manifested around her arm. And with her nascent spirit-laden hand, she wrenched the air, warping the very fabric of reality itself. Her immense physical strength tore through this tangible fabric, creating an otherworldly fracture in reality. And even in this small and narrow vista, Michael was able to catch a glimpse of a fortified stronghold where the rift in the tectonic plates were supposed to be. Beyond the rift and atop a floating island stood a fully fortified castle with ramparts surrounding it from all sides and bastions jutting out on the four corners. Even upon a superficial glance at this castle, he saw hundreds of light mana and ability power signatures materializing in his vision. Tens of soldiers walked around the parapets, briefly checking through the gaps in the battlements as they patrolled the area. The entire castle itself became a galaxy in his vision. Michael was completely shocked to see an entire settlement hidden away from reality with no one the wiser. Whoever created this was definitely someone beyond the body formation realm. Only a nascent spirit cultivator could hide this from his sight. "Follow me," Katarina said. By now, diamond crystal-like structures had formed around the rift, solidifying the doorway to this stronghold. She confidently strutted inside, her face devoid of any consternation. Now, Michael would have been a little bit reluctant besieging a castle, guns blazing, all by themselves. But seeing the unperturbed look on Katarina, he felt a little bit better. All three of them stepped inside, finding themselves facing a 20-foot-tall bulwark as their first obstacle. "I'm going to create a distraction while both of you find Lyra." Before Michael could even ask any questions, he felt a tremendous shockwave by his side as Katarina transformed into her nascent spirit form instantly, catching all of the soldiers' attention. A brilliant, illustrious woman appeared hovering in the air, her diamond-like armor making her glisten like the moon in a completely dark sky. Her very stature demanded attention. The invisible pressure of her nascent spirit form penetrated through the walls of the castle, alerting everyone of her intrusion. Immediately, the soldiers standing on the parapets shouted down towards their castle. "They're here. They found us. And they sent a nascent spirit cultivator. Damn it. Focus. How in the hell did she find us?" The entire castle became lit with an infernal red hue as the unhooded figures released their divas. Above them, the figure of a vaguely humanoid flame creature roared animatedly. Their 2D caricature wave of embers billowed up in an attempt to intimidate the intruder. It didn't work. Katarina stood in the air, imposing a stalwart, inexorable fortitude that remained undaunted facing hundreds of magnetics. After all, she didn't even consider them magnetics at all. They were simply a pale imitation that could never even reach a fraction of the real thing. Dealing with these ants was simple. "Tell your platinum to come here and face me," she shouted. Meanwhile, Michael and Lady Farron used the distraction to scale up the castle's tall bulwark. "Hey!" As they climbed over the wall, an unhooded figure noticed their presence. But before they could even alert the others, a sharp arrow struck through his throat, killing him instantly. Without even missing a beat, Lady Farron drew another arrow and accurately hit a soldier about to climb up through the winding stairs of the bastion. "They shall take my arrows as a gift, for they are the first to witness the greatness of my new bow," Lady Farron muttered. Impressed, Michael nodded to himself. It was definitely the correct choice to give her a compound bow. "Lyra, where are you?" They both scanned the layout of the stronghold, seeing multiple tightly guarded entrances along the windows and drawbridges. And the guards there weren't just normal magnetics either. According to ChatJK5, there were multiple fifth-stage magnetics among them. Katarina was right. They really take their security seriously. Although he could take them if he had to, he simply didn't have the time to do so. In fact, defeating them would only draw unnecessary attention to them, completely voiding Katarina's distraction. Their goal was to get in, retrieve Lyra, and get out. He was simply too weak to go in guns blazing like Katarina. "Get in the drone. It's our only way to get inside," he said to Lady Farron. She followed his words without question. Once inside, Michael reduced the drone's size to its limit, becoming as small as a tiny mouse. With such small proportions, the muffled propellers turned even more silent, albeit at the cost of speed. And to top it all off, the drone's hexagonally patterned surface began to shimmer and change colors, completely adapting to its surroundings. It was completely invisible. This undetectable spying machine then flew towards a protruding spire annexed to the main castle. And near its conical eaves, they went straight towards a barred window intended only for sunlight, passing easily through the tight poles without problem. Bypassing a guard standing on the way there, multiple footfalls echoed through the tight space as soldiers marched up the spire. They climbed up to search for a vantage point to fight against the nascent spirit realm on the skies. They were completely oblivious to the drone that passed by them overhead. Michael continued to pilot the drone down through the spire, eventually landing on an overground tunnel that led to the castle itself. Going through this tunnel, they eventually found themselves in an open space on the other side. But instead of a wide, expansive hall typical of a castle, they saw a mind-numbing, paradoxical collection of stairs, doors, and open tunnels that completely defied the rules of physics. Some were upside down, some leading to nowhere at all, and everything was convoluted. This place was purposefully esoteric. Only those in their organization would be able to navigate through this maze. How are we going to find Lyra? Michael ruminated on the question for a few seconds before realizing the answer. ChatJK5, can you add a Find My Phone app? Certainly. Uploading the code now. In just a few seconds, the phone in Michael's hand vibrated, showing a new app on the home screen. As he clicked on the app, the screen changed to show a 3D compass with a red pointer leading to a specific direction. Distance to Lyra's phone, 349 meters. ChatJK5 once again came up clutch. Michael followed the compass, piloting the drone towards an upside-down staircase that seemingly led straight to a brick wall. But as the drone reached the dead end, the solid brick wall turned into a mist that allowed them to pass through unrestrained. The drone buzzed forwards through a dark tunnel leading towards another expansive set of convoluted stairs. Trusting the app, Michael continued onwards to another false dead end, until they finally reached a Victorian-style hallway that led to a single red door. The compass, which had been moving erratically throughout their journey, was now pointing in one single direction: forwards. Beyond this arched wooden gate, Michael and Lady Farron saw an ability power signature manifesting as a single, orange glowing blob through the screens in the control room. That was Lyra. He was sure of it. They both exited out of the drone and walked towards the door. Pushing it open, they saw an austere white room devoid of any windows or openings. And at the center of the room was a tiny elven girl hugging her knees. She looked up as the door opened. She was about to say something when Lady Farron rushed to her side and embraced her tightly. "Thank the earth you're okay." Michael watched this endearing scene with a smile on his face. But that didn't last long. "I wonder how you found us," a voice echoed from the hallway. Michael and Lady Farron turned around and saw a debonair young man with short, pepper hair on the other end of the hallway. His suave demeanor fit perfectly with the quaint Victorian era of the hallway, as if he had come from that time exactly. The man held himself in high regard, sauntering over towards them with a pep in his step, oozing ostentatious confidence with a lot of swagger. "Keep behind me, Lyra. Is he the one who took you?" Lady Farron asked, her compound bow already drawn and halfway into a shot. Lyra nodded. Immediately, the mithril bow creaked as Farron's Dow heart empowered the arrow, flying towards the debonair young man with the solemn and stately aura of the gargantuan acacia trees. But just as it was about to hit the young man's chest, his hands blurred and caught the arrow in its fletching. "Wow, I would have never thought you guys had 2 mithril compound bows. You could have shared that with us, and none of this would have happened. Who are you? Why have you done this?" Lady Farron questioned. Green energy seeped out of her chest, her ability power connecting to the arrow in the debonair young man's hands. Tree roots manifested on the arrow's shaft, snaking around the young man's hands and his chest, restraining his upper body within less than a second. At the same time, Lady Farron shot another arrow, this time aimed straight at his forehead. But despite this perilous predicament, the debonair young man simply shook his head with mirth. "Ha! Where are my manners? You show your powers, it's only apt for me to show mine. I wouldn't want to be seen as uncouth by my new friends." The dashing young man raised his head, briefly closing his eyes, before a blinding red light burst out of his eyelids. A flaming golem made out of cyclopean igneous rocks appeared above the debonair young man, its appearance fully formed and almost tangible. He was, at the very least, a 9th-stage body formation magnetic. Soon, the roots fettering his hands started to smoke, a fire burning it from the inside and out till it was nothing but scattering ash. Within a few seconds, the debonair young man was freed from his restraints, allowing him to easily catch and break the arrow in an instant. "That weapon is truly remarkable. Such a pristine work of art. Would you be so kind as to tell me where you found that? No? Well, at least tell me how you found our stronghold. I was pretty proud of my location this time around. That pretty warrior of yours back there doesn't have the wherewithal to locate us. That's for sure." Lady Farron kept Lyra close behind her. Slowly, the realization of helplessness was creeping into her face. She couldn't defeat this human, especially not when she was protecting Lyra at the same time. Just then, Michael turned towards her. "Both of you escape. I'll deal with him." Both elves looked at him with concern, but he reassured them with a smile and a wink. "It's fine. I'm pretty strong myself." Just as Lady Farron was about to say something, Lyra tugged on her sleeve. "I believe in him." Farron's eyes widened. Lyra was not the type to believe in someone. Her whole life trained her not to. The little elven girl then pointed to the phone in her hands. "He got my message. I believe in him." And in that moment, the debonair man coughed and stole the moment. "Ahem. Not to intrude on your conversation, but who said anything about escaping? I'm afraid I'm going to have to keep you all in this place for a little while longer. I need to know everything you know." He raised his hand, the infernal golem behind him imitating his movements. For a brief moment, nothing happened. But suddenly, Michael lunged at Lady Farron and pushed her away into the wall. And in the next moment, the patch of ground where she stood suddenly melted into a puddle of seething magma. If he hadn't acted fast enough, Lady Farron would have burned from the inside and out. Debonair young man. Ninth stage body formation realm. Talent, artificial heat. Ability power. The user gains control over the concept of heat transfer, allowing him to imbue everything he targets with a reality-defying change in temperature. Artifice detected. Interesting. The debonair young man nodded. Most people get caught off guard by my attacks the first time they see it. But you saw it instantly. It seems that I've underestimated you, little child. Let me properly introduce myself. People call me Platinum. That's not really my name, but a title I've achieved through blood, sweat, and tears. So you'll forgive me if I ask for my due respect. Platinum bowed to Michael, paying him obeisance. Now, would you kindly tell me your name? Michael ignored him and instead gestured for Lady Farron and Lyra to escape. Go. I'll take care of him. Lady Farron looked towards the hallway where Platinum stood inexorably. That was the only exit, yet Michael still implored them to escape. She looked at him askance, unsure of his plan. But he just nodded at them and said, Trust me. The little Lyra peeked out from Lady Farron's back, gazing at the end of the Victorian hallway. Platinum returned her stare, giving her a smile. Unpleasant memories flashed through her mind, taking her back to the moment when he and multiple hooded figures wrenched the compound bow from her hands. She struggled, forcing them to take her with the weapon. They placed her in desolate isolation, filling her with dreary thoughts and hopeless despair. Yet despite those emotions threatening to flare up back in her mind, Lyra looked back at Michael, and with a determined nod, she wrestled herself out of Lyra's grasp and took off running into the hallway just as he said. Lady Farron, forced into action, took off running after the little elven girl. With their footfalls echoing in the hallway, both elves were just mere moments away from heading straight into Platinum's open arms. Thank you for handing them to me on a silver platter, Platinum muttered, his hands wide open. The infernal golem above him sizzled, the cracks in its two-dimensional art-style body spewing out magma. And just as Lyra was only a meter away from him, an iron block suddenly dropped from the ceiling and landed perfectly on Platinum's shoulder. Click. The switch triggered, and a temporal ability power surged out of Michael's chest and wrapped itself around Platinum's body. In that instant, the debonair man's momentum stopped, his internal time frozen completely. Lyra and Lady Farron rushed past the inanimate Platinum, the latter showing complete and utter shock before looking back at Michael. But she didn't have time to be amazed. She pulled on the darkwood of her compound bow and launched a stringed arrow. It flew through the tunnel before eventually landing on the large open space with the convoluted stairs and openings. Taking Lyra with her other hand, she pulled them both forwards, launching them further and further away from Platinum. Meanwhile, the iron switch block on Platinum's shoulder turned incandescent. Less than an instant later, the metal itself melted into goo. Michael felt his connection to the switch cease just as Platinum regained his autonomy. The debonair man's eyes burned with fervid anger towards Michael, before he quickly turned around to chase after the elven duo. Just as his infernal golem stretched out its hand, another switch shot from his side and hit his ribs. Platinum became frozen in time, his hands outstretched to nothing in particular. But almost in the same moment, the switch melted into a pile of goo. That is annoying, Platinum scowled, his suave countenance dropping for a moment. The debonair man had gained resistance to the switch, meaning that Michael's stunlock wouldn't be as effective further on. But Michael knew that. He raised his hand, his finger glowing with power. Two prismatic beams shot towards Platinum's torso, hitting him in the chest and in the stomach. It tore through his defenses, searing through his muscles and innards before eventually piercing through to the other side. Gah! Platinum groaned. Then, his head swiveled around the room, trying to find the source of that second shot. Unfortunately for him, he couldn't find a trace of the drone. You have weird tricks up your sleeve, child. But that is nothing. The two gaping holes in his torso began to burn, closing the injury with barely any scarring. Platinum's posture straightened, glaring at Michael. I'll deal with you later. But for now. He turned around, his gaze piercing through the tunnel towards the two elves. Meanwhile, Lady Farron and Lyra found themselves in the middle of the convoluted room. "Just follow me," Lady Farron said. She still remembered where they entered with the drone. All they had to do was go through the spiraling staircase and they were halfway out. Just then, they heard Platinum's voice echoing through the walls. "You can't escape. Catch them." Suddenly, 10 hooded figures exited out of the different tunnels and doors all over the expansive space. Each of them emanated a strength equivalent to that of a third-stage magnetic. Lady Farron and Lyra stopped in their tracks, surrounded by magnetics from all sides. They had nowhere to go. "Apologies," Platinum shrugged. "It was a nice try, but you should have known sieging our stronghold with 3 people isn't going to be enough." Michael nodded. "I know." Suddenly, Lyra and Lady Farron saw a constellation of prismatic lights appear in the convoluted open space. Mini-drones, 15 in total, revealed themselves behind the hooded figures approaching the 2 elves. And just as the magnetics looked back to see where the light was coming from, iron switch blocks shot towards their bodies, freezing them in place. Unlike their leader, they were way too weak to resist his ability power. The mini-drone's cannons released a prismatic beam right in their heads, piercing through their skulls unimpeded and killing them almost instantaneously. 10 bodies dropped to the floor. "Silence." "What?" Platinum screamed out, all his genteel pretenses removed. Anger and shock coursed through his veins after seeing 10 of his pawns killed. Just like that. His fury seethed even more as he saw the 2 elves continuing to escape out of the castle. "You've gone and done it now," Platinum growled. "It finally makes sense. The compound bows, those disappearing flying weapons. It's all because of you." Michael kept silent, unperturbed. "Ha ha ha ha. You will be a much better gift than the compound bow. You will serve as a wonderful boon once we study your ways. We will make you spill your secrets." Platinum lurched forwards, grabbing at Michael's throat. His infernal golem diva silently roared, creating an almost invisible beam of heat that extended towards Michael. The sizzling air clashed against Michael's absolute unity defense, making the prismatic shield tremble for a little bit. Still, it held on. An instant later, Platinum appeared beside Michael, leg outstretched for a roundhouse kick. Michael braced himself as he got launched to the wall. But instead of crashing against something hard, Platinum's infernal kick melted the wall into tar, miring him like glue. And just as Platinum lunged forward for a follow-up punch Michael in this vulnerable state, the drone released Unity Gun that pierced through the debonair man's ribs, causing him to slew backwards. Michael flicked a switch on the melted wall, pausing its miring effects and allowing him to escape. "Kurg!" Platinum groaned as he got up back to his feet. Then, he disappeared into a blur. An infernal kick reared behind him. But just as he was about to hit Michael again, his leg flared into a fiery flame. Upon swinging his kick, a blade of infernal heat launched into the air. And complementing that with 5 more kicks, a multifaceted blade rocketed towards the hovering drone. And suddenly, the igneous golem diva above Platinum's head exploded into a million pieces, its eruption seemingly empowering his launched attack. But despite this, the drone remained stagnant, taking the attack head-on. A shield appeared on its metallic frame, nullifying Platinum's ultimate attack like it was nothing. The debonair man's face turned completely aghast. He looked down, seeing a solid prismatic saber piercing through his chest. Michael went in for the kill. After all, the element of surprise was his biggest advantage. He wouldn't have even been able to get this close to Platinum if the guy knew about the true capabilities of his Unity beams. He deliberately put his drone in the line of danger, flaunting its capabilities and therefore catching Platinum's ire. And just like he expected, his drone became the priority target. Of course, if Platinum knew that his drone's shield was even more powerful than his own, then he would have gone straight for Michael. But he didn't, and that caused him the entire fight. Platinum staggered, falling to his knees as the Unity saber continuously burned his insides. An outpour of ice-cold mist bursted out of the artifice as it tried to fight the destructive heat of the Unity. But it was in vain. What the hell is this?" Platinum muttered, blood rushing out of his mouth. He was no longer the graceful, suave, debonair that he portrayed himself to be. With veiny red streaks coursing through his eyes, blood dripping down his mouth, and the unity saber ravaging his chest, Platinum looked like a feral cat cornered and on the brink of ruin. His countenance was that of complete and utter disbelief, with a healthy dose of regret. With the difference in cultivation, he thought defeating Michael would be a sure win, albeit a little bit laborious. Michael was only in the 7th stage of body formation, while he was half-step into the nascent spirit realm itself. The boy's powers shouldn't even affect him in the slightest bit. Yet, those piercing beams seemingly ignored all of Platinum's natural ability defenses, destroying them as if it was a piece of paper. He shouldn't have underestimated him. Unfortunately for him, that realization dawned on him a little bit too late. Michael pushed the unity saber deeper into Platinum's chest, its end piercing through the other side. Platinum winced, his hands subconsciously grabbing at the unity saber to try and pull it out of him. However, his palms and fingers incurred 3rd-degree burns instantly as he tried. "What did she tell you? Did she say that we were causing ruin to the world?" Michael furrowed his brows. "She wasn't telling you everything. We want the exact opposite. We wish to save humanity from an inevitable destruction. We are its zealous protectors. While you are stuck in your ways saying that we—" And in the middle of Platinum's tirade about the strife plaguing the two sides, he suddenly stopped and stared at Michael, a realization slowly dawning onto him. Ha! Ha ha! You don't even know. You're not with them, are you? Ha 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 ha! This realization brought amusement in the debonair young man's misery. Michael twisted the unity saber, causing Platinum to cough out blood. "Cock! Who are you? What organization are you talking about?" But Platinum refused to answer, continuing to laugh in irony despite causing even more harm to himself. "I'll tell you this, forget you even know about us. This is not your fight. You'll only be throwing away your own life fighting a lost cause. We are inevitable." Michael grabbed him by the cuff of his collars. "I'm not afraid. I'll hunt every single one of you till the end of the earth. I don't doubt at least one of them will tell me the truth. Ha ha! Ha ha ha! You know nothing, child." Platinum's eyes were starting to turn gray, his body slowly tensing taut. The cold, misty energy from his artifice was turning feeble and insipid as the unity saber continued to wreak havoc in his chest. Michael vigorously shook him awake. He was adamant in getting an answer. This Platinum was no ordinary pawn in their enigmatic organization. If he wanted to get answers about them and the artifice, there was no better source of information. This was his only chance, and he wasn't going to let go of it. "Tell me." Platinum weakly opened his quivering mouth, about to say something. But all of a sudden, his right hand briefly surged with activity, startling Michael. A prismatic shield manifested around Michael as he braced himself against a last burst of attack. But it never came. Instead, Platinum used the last of his strength to reach down into his open tunic, taking out a gold pendant necklace hidden inside. Platinum yanked at his own necklace and threw it at Michael at an intense speed. Michael watched the gold pendant stumbling in the air as it arced towards him. Upon a cursory glance, its gold chain looked opulent, but was unremarkable and devoid of anything special imbued inside. But as his eyes focused on the jewel hooked at its center, his heart briefly skipped a beat. That midnight, sparkling, starry gem emanated a kind of power that made his godforged pieces tense in trepidation. It discharged an invisible pressure that exacted obeisance and submission from anyone in its immediate vicinity. Michael braced himself, a foreboding guess flashed. He only felt this kind of pressure from one other person before, Katarina. And before he could even react, the midnight gem suddenly shattered into a million pieces as it raced through the air, releasing copious amounts of dark, tenebrous mist. A shockwave of wind exploded outwards, causing Michael's feet to slew across the ground, his back crashing into a convoluted staircase protruding from the wall. His prismatic shield shattered, causing him to feel the full extent of the explosive force. Coughing up a spat of blood, Michael picked himself up from the ground and turned towards the source of that insidious, dark mist. "I didn't want to use this, but you forced my hand," Platinum weakly grumbled, forcing himself to sit up. In front of him, the cloud of gaseous black mist began to condense, creating sharp edges of a humanoid figure donning a fully tenebrous black medieval armor. "Bow down to the piece of nascent spirit born from the grandmaster." Meanwhile, Lyra and Lady Farron raced through the convoluted tunnels of the stronghold. Even with no one chasing them from behind, they still ran as if their legs were about to give out. This was a race against time. Michael had heroically chosen himself to stand behind while the two of them escaped by themselves. Lady Farron didn't know the extent of Michael's power, but she knew that he wasn't stronger than a body formation cultivator that was half-step into the nascent spirit realm. Thankfully, the mini-drones that had saved them from the horde of hooded figures had returned to Michael's side by now, increasing his survival capabilities. Lyra must have sensed Farron's trepidation as she took the elder elf's hand and took it in comfort. "It's okay. Bro is strong," she muttered with confidence. Lady Farron nodded silently, before the two ran off into the dead-end staircase, bypassing the illusion and finally reaching the end of the castle. They were finally back to the tunnel that led to the annex spire where they came from. Lady Farron stopped, seeing a hooded figure lying in the distance. She held her bow taut, before she realized that the man was dead, lying on a pool of his own blood. In fact, he wasn't the only one becoming a casualty in this siege. With her special elven eyes, she saw the entire vastness of the battlefield and realized that there were no survivors left at all here in the stronghold. Everyone was either dead, eviscerated, or burned into nothing but a charred corpse. Standing high up on the air was Katarina, still exuding that indomitable strength that became a lingering presence in the battlefield. Her brilliant, diamond armor was still as pristine as ever, nary blood nor scratches on its surface. It didn't look as if she had just fought against an entire army of magnetics. There were more than 100 magnetics standing on the parapets before, each one having a strength above that of the third-stage body formation realm. Yet they all fell under her strength. Katarina lowered her gaze, seeing Lady Farron and the little Lyra amongst a pile of rubble. They were waving their hands, trying to take her attention. "He's still there," Lady Farron shouted. And before Katarina could ask for more, she suddenly felt an invisible shockwave emanate from inside the castle. Her hairs stood on end, sensing familiarity within the presence. It was just a tiny wisp of him, but it was him nonetheless. But then, she remembered that Kyo was still there. That presence was not something that he should ever face. With consternation in her face, Katarina disappeared into a blur. Michael stood with the wall behind his back, staring at the tenebrous shadow knight in front of him. This creature was both incorporeal and tangible at the same time, as if it was a ghost with a lingering regret tying him back down into the real world. Its edges were fuzzy, its armored face nothing but darkness on its surface. But in between the slits of its helm, Michael saw two ghastly motes of red light emanating an intense, fervid hatred towards him. "Feast your eyes on a genuine diva from a nascent spirit cultivator," Platinum roared in pride. Michael frowned. How is that even possible? This diva was disembodied from its owner. And as Michael learned before, divas were inseparable from their owners, akin to shadows and reflections. One couldn't exist without the other and vice versa. That is the vast difference between a nascent spirit cultivator from a body formation magnetic like you and I. Seeing the glorious form of the Shadow Knight diva in front of him, Platinum regained all of his vigor. His face was still pallid and ghastly, on the brink of death, but this huge reversal in the tides of battle invigorated him greatly. It made him overconfident. "Grandmaster, this diva is from him?" Michael asked, trepidation obviously written on his face. Platinum nodded. "That is right. Grandmaster bestowed me a piece of his nascent spirit as a gift during my ascension to become Platinum. This was meant to be a trump card, a last resort in the throes of death. It's a shame that I had to use it, but it doesn't matter. He will be pleased once I return to his side alive and well, having defeated the invaders of our stronghold. I shall return to his side in New Sparta and ask for his approval in advancing to the next realm. And once we have those werewolves under our control, we will rule over New Sparta and use it as our stepping stone to expand into the rest of the royal continent. Ha 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 ha. Michael stayed silent, nodding to himself. I see. So your goal is the werewolves, and your grandmaster is hiding somewhere in New Sparta. His words were like a bucket of cold water splashing into Platinum's face. His face turned into a horrified countenance. Either it was because of his lightheadedness from losing all of that blood or some other factor, but he became so lost in his own reverie that he completely lost control of his self-restraint. Realizing that he said far, far too much, Platinum decisively bit his own tongue in repentance. It doesn't matter, he said, slurring his words as blood gushed out of his mangled tongue. You're going to die. Just as he said that, the Shadow Knight Diva raised its leg and stepped forward, an invisible pulse of tangible ability power gushing towards Michael. The force alone made him crash back into the wall, coughing out blood. He wiped his mouth, before staring back at Platinum with a smile on his face. What are you doing? Michael shrugged. Nothing. I'm just going to level the playing field a little bit. His shadow billowed out from under his feet, forming a chasm in front of him. A moment later, a womanly figure ascended from the depths of the shadow.